I never imagined I'd be recounting this story, but here we are. Moving into Oak Ridge Estates had felt like a dream when my wife, Sarah, and I settled in 3 years ago. Beautiful homes, immaculate lawns, quiet streets, and a community pool only a short walk away. It was perfect for our son Max, who has cystic fibrosis and relies heavily on swimming therapy to keep his lungs strong. What we didn't anticipate was Karen Willoughby, the HOA president, who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Karen was the living embodiment of suburban entitlement. Mid-50s, a flawless blonde bob that never shifted out of place, designer sunglasses permanently perched on top of her head, and a voice sharp enough to cut through sheet metal whenever she discovered something that violated her sacred HOA rulebook. And believe me, she worshipped that rulebook. I swear she slept with the bylaws under her pillow. The regulations are what preserve our property values, she would lecture at monthly meetings, speaking slowly as if explaining basic arithmetic to toddlers. Without proper enforcement, this community would descend into chaos. My first encounter with Karen was relatively harmless. I had installed a small ramp at our front entrance to help Max on days when his equipment made it difficult to navigate the steps. The contractor assured me it complied with all city codes. But that didn't stop Karen from strutting up our driveway early one Saturday morning. Clipboard clenched in her hand like a weapon. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sugary in a way that clearly wasn't sincere. "I don't recall the Architectural Review Committee approving this modification." She flicked her wrist toward the ramp as though it were an unsightly pile of junk ruining her perfect neighborhood aesthetic. I explained calmly that it was a medical necessity for my son, and even showed her the relevant section of the Americans with Disabilities Act that protected our right to install reasonable accommodations. She gave me a tight, brittle smile and walked away. But I knew instantly that she wasn't letting it go. Over the next few months, we started receiving violation notices for the most ridiculous infractions. Our trash cans were visible from the street for only 30 minutes past the designated window. The shade of white we used to touch up. Our fence trim was apparently eggshell, rather than the HOA-approved pearl. Personal favorite was when she cited us for excessive medical equipment, visible through windows, referring to Max's nebulizer sitting on a table in our living room. I contested every violation with meticulous detail, citing statutes, regulations, and case law where applicable. I'm not a lawyer, but as an engineer, I excel at breaking down complicated systems and understanding them inside and out. Karen despised being challenged, especially by someone who seemed to know the rulebook almost better than she did. Things escalated dramatically when we installed a small backup generator for Max's medical equipment. Our area experiences intermittent power outages, and we couldn't risk his treatments being interrupted. We followed every city guideline, kept it screened behind a decorative lattice, and the unit was remarkably quiet when running. Yet somehow, Karen, with her supernatural ability to detect any imperceptible change within a 5-block radius, showed up less than 24 hours after the installation. Generators are expressly prohibited under Section 7.3 of our covenants, she declared, arms folded stiffly across her chest. It's an eyesore, and the noise disrupts everyone's quality of life. I invited her to listen to it in operation, which she did reluctantly, then pointed out politely that it was quieter than her husband's vintage Mustang he revved every Sunday morning without fail. I also explained that this too was protected under reasonable medical accommodation rules. Her face tightened. "We'll see about that," she muttered with a smile so cold it made my stomach twist. The board meets next week. The board, unsurprisingly, consisted mostly of Karen's friends and people far too intimidated to oppose her. But I came armed with printed laws, medical documentation, and statements from supportive neighbors. I even had Max's pulmonologist join via video to explain exactly why uninterrupted power was crucial for his treatment. Faced with clear legal liability, the board voted to grant us an exception. Karen didn't speak a word during the vote. She just gripped her gavel so tightly her knuckles turned ghost white. When the meeting ended, she brushed past me and whispered, "This isn't over. I dismissed her words as the empty frustration of someone unaccustomed to losing. That was a mistake. The following month, we took Max to visit his grandparents for the weekend, leaving on Friday and returning late Sunday. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, I noticed something was wrong. The generator was gone. At first, I assumed it had been stolen by random thieves. But when I checked our security cameras, the truth was far more disturbing. At exactly 7:15 on Saturday morning, Karen appeared on the footage, directing two men in unmarked coveralls as they disconnected and hauled away our generator. She stood with her clipboard, pointing, gesturing, and checking her watch repeatedly, as if she had scheduled the entire operation with military precision. The men loaded it onto a truck and pulled away, while Karen stood there watching, a smug, satisfied smile stretching across her face. I was furious. This wasn't petty harassment anymore, it was the outright theft of medical equipment. Equipment worth over $2,000, but more importantly, equipment that ensured my son's therapy wouldn't be disrupted during a power outage. I picked up the phone immediately and called the police. 2 officers arrived in under 20 minutes. I showed them the security footage and laid out the entire situation. One of them recognized Karen the moment her face appeared on camera. "Mrs. Willoughby, the HOA president?" he asked, his eyebrows arching in disbelief. "We've had calls about her before." They took my statement, copied the footage, and explained that because the generator's value exceeded $1,000, the crime qualified as grand larceny, a felony in our state. They assured me they would deal with it promptly, and suggested I contact my insurance company in the meantime. Less than an hour later, I found myself standing at our living room window, watching as a police cruiser rolled to a stop in front of Karen's pristine colonial home 3 doors down. The officers talked with her on the porch for several minutes. Even from a distance, I could see her posture shift, her usual haughty confidence dissolving into visible worry. She gestured wildly, no doubt spinning some elaborate excuse about enforcing HOA rules. The next morning, Monday, I was working from home when loud voices outside caught my attention. I looked out just in time to see Karen being escorted to a waiting police car, her hands cuffed behind her back. The officers weren't rough, but it was clear they weren't buying her version of events. Neighbors poured out of their homes, staring in stunned disbelief as the self-appointed queen bee of the HOA was guided into the back seat of the cruiser. My phone buzzed non-stop with texts from neighbors who had seen the spectacle firsthand. Apparently, when questioned further, Karen refused to reveal where she had taken our generator, insisting she had full authority as HOA president to remove it. That refusal escalated the situation from a civil dispute to criminal obstruction. Later that afternoon, Detective Rivera followed up with me, explaining what they had uncovered. Karen had hired a landscaping crew to remove the generator, claiming she was authorized by the homeowner. She then had it transported to her brother-in-law's warehouse in the next county. "We've recovered your property," Detective Rivera told me with a small, satisfied smile. "It appears undamaged. Mrs. Willoughby has been charged with grand larceny, filing a false report, and obstruction of justice. And considering this involved medical equipment for a child, the district attorney is taking it very seriously." Karen was released on bail later that evening. I watched as her husband escorted her back home. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a single day, while she glanced nervously toward our house, her expression a mix of fear and venom. She immediately looked away when she realized I was watching from the window. The following week, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Instead of Karen at the head of the room, her vice president, Doug, a chronically anxious man who had always acted as her obedient yes-man, stood at the podium. The room crackled with tension as he announced that Karen had been temporarily removed from her position, pending the outcome of her legal case. When he opened the floor for comments, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up for years finally found their voices. One after another, they recounted their personal horror stories about Karen's tyrannical behavior. It was as if a dam had burst. Years' worth of resentment came rushing out, stories of arbitrary fines, personal vendettas, and selective enforcement of the rules she weaponized to maintain control. By the end of the meeting, a formal motion had been made to permanently remove Karen from the board. The vote wasn't even close, overwhelmingly in favor of her removal. As Doug counted the final votes, Karen, who had been sitting silently in the back of the room, shot to her feet. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "I've given 8 years to this community. I've kept your property values high. I've protected the integrity of this neighborhood." Her voice cracked as she scanned the room, desperately searching for even a flicker of sympathy. She found none. "This is all your fault," she suddenly shrieked, jabbing her finger at me. "You and your special needs and special exceptions and special equipment." Her husband tried to usher her toward the door, but she jerked away from him. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as mascara streaked down her cheeks. "Do you have any idea what this will do to my real estate business?" she choked out. "Who's going to list their home with someone facing felony charges?" For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes, not fear of losing authority, but fear of genuine consequences. Legal fees would be steep, but the damage to her reputation in our small community might be impossible to repair. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind her with a final, echoing thud that felt like the end of an era. Doug cleared his throat and attempted to move on to the next agenda item, but I barely heard him. I was still absorbing the reality that after months of harassment, intimidation, and threats, justice had finally found its way to Karen Willoughby, and all it took was her own arrogance leading her to commit a felony against herself.